Good evening, everyone. I'm Patty Vickman, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Door County. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started this evening. Please turn off or silence your cell phones at this time. The bathrooms are to your right, just outside the door, and we ask that if you need to leave to use the restroom, that you go out that way and not come in front of the camera, because the camera is videotaping this for later broadcast. This is a wonderful turnout this evening, and on behalf of the Door County League of Women Voters and our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, we thank you for taking the time to come and hear our candidates who are interested in representing District 1 in the Wisconsin State Senate. District 1 is one of 33 state Senate districts in Wisconsin. It covers all of Door and Kewaunee counties, along with portions of Brown, Manitowoc, Outagamie, and Calumet counties. Candidate forums like this one are one part of the Door County League's mission and nonpartisan effort to inform voters about candidates and elections in an unbiased and nonpartisan manner. We do this so that you as the public have the opportunity to become better informed by hearing directly from the candidates who will appear on the November 8th election ballot. Now let me introduce the two candidates competing to represent District 1 in the Wisconsin State Senate. We have Andrea Gage-Michaels, who is the Democratic candidate, and Andrea Jacque, who is the Republican candidate. We want to thank you as candidates for running for office and for agreeing to take part in this forum. In a few minutes, they will have the opportunity to introduce themselves to you and talk about why they are running for this important position. We also want to acknowledge and thank the Southern Door County School District, Superintendent Chris Peterson, and Head of Transportation and Facilities, Dan Visti, for making this forum possible. The League of Women Voters of Door County began in 1953. We're one of 20 chapters in Wisconsin and one of hundreds across the country aligned with the National League, which, by the way, celebrated its 100th birthday in 2020. Yes, isn't that great? The League is nonpartisan and never supports or opposes any political party or candidate. However, we are also a political organization of women and men dedicated to encouraging and promoting good government through informed, active participation in all levels of democracy, local, state, and national. We in the League work to empower voters through activities such as candidate forums and voter registration. We also study and act on political, social, and environmental issues that impact our local communities. The League continuously works to eliminate any and all barriers to full participation within our organization and to prevent or eliminate any barriers in our elected governing bodies and in the voting process and its elections. At our core, our fundamental and urgent message is democracy is not a spectator sport, and we urge everyone to get in the game. More information about the League can be found on the display table in this room. There's a sign-up sheet if you'd like to receive updates of our League activities. Also, please check out our website at lwvdoorcounty.org, or we are also on Facebook. A recording of this forum, as well as the earlier forum that was run this summer for the candidates running for the Wisconsin Assembly District 1, will be posted there, along with lots of information about voting and League events and information. As to our candidate forums, the views expressed are solely those of the candidates and not of the League of Door County, nor our co-sponsor, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. This forum is not an endorsement of any candidate. Our forums are recorded and, as already said, will be posted on the League's Door County website. We will alert and urge the public to view the recording through the local media outlets. We encourage you as well, and the candidates and the public, to also spread the word. The forum consists of anonymous questions and candidates' responses. Some of you may have picked up a card like this at the table. If not, there are some more over there at the table. We encourage you to ask questions about topics of your concern. Questions must be relevant to the position of Wisconsin State Senate and to both candidates. Questions must focus on issues and not on any specific candidate, comment, or their record. Each question will be addressed to each candidate. A question posed to only one question will not be used. Questions need to be worded in an unbiased and concise way. Our question screeners will look for questions that cover a variety of issues. Please use a separate card for each question you ask, and as you finish writing your question, raise your card and a runner will come to pick it up from you. Finally, the League of Women Voters of Door County prides itself on organizing and moderating forums that are fair and nonpartisan. We expect and have never been disappointed in the civil manner in which the candidates and the public have conducted themselves. We know that that code of conduct will be upheld here tonight. Because this is a forum, not a debate, the candidates have been instructed to only speak about and for themselves, their positions and ideas, and not reference each other. The moderator will promote a civil atmosphere in which all candidates can respond to each question effectively. Toward that goal, we ask that there be no response to the candidates' answers. No comments, cheering, jeering, or clapping, or any other form of demonstration. Thank you. Now, I'm honored to introduce our League Chairwoman and tonight's forum moderator to you, Susan Kohout. Please welcome her. It was okay to clap for her.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good evening. And I have to say, before I go any further, we are so thrilled with the turnout. Thank you so much. We have been waiting for people to feel comfortable to come out to events again, and this is wonderful. It's always a good day when there are more people in the audience than there are putting on the forum, and you have definitely done that tonight. So, as has been already stated, this will be a forum, not a debate. The Door County League has always striven to provide forums in which all candidates have equal time to present their positions in a respectful, civil, and fair setting. And we ask all of you to help us provide that opportunity here tonight. The Door County League's guidelines will be the format for the forum. Our candidates have agreed to these guidelines. Candidates will introduce themselves in 2-minute opening statements. Each candidate will then be given 2 minutes to answer each question. Each question will be posed to all candidates. However, a candidate may decline to answer any question, and no question will be directed to any one person. Each candidate will then have up to 3 minutes. Thank you. We'll have up to 3 minutes for a closing statement. Am I loud enough? Better? Okay. The candidates have drawn straws to determine who will speak first, and then the order of speaking will be alternated so that each candidate will have a chance to be the first to respond. League member screeners are reviewing the written questions submitted to eliminate redundancies and inappropriate questions. If the screeners do not understand the question, it will not be asked. If is used, questions will be asked as they are written. All submitted questions will be made available to the candidates after the forum. Candidates, league timekeepers in the front row will signal when you have 30 seconds remaining in your response, and again when it is time to stop. We ask that you conclude your thought and stop when signaled. No flash cameras, video cameras, or other visual or sound recording devices are allowed to be used during the forum other than by the press and media and the forum sponsor. Candidates are not allowed to use any audio or video from the forum in or for commercial advertising. We will ask questions until approximately 7:45 or until we've run out of questions, whichever comes first. Candidates will then have 3 minutes to elaborate on any issue during their closing remarks. We will now begin the forum with candidates making their 2-minute introductory remarks. Mr. Jacque has drawn the short straw, so he will begin. So, Mr. Jacque?
Thank you, Susan, and everyone with the League of Women Voters, and those in attendance here tonight and in the comfort of their own home watching this later. It is a tremendous honor to serve the 1st State Senate District, to work for my constituents in cutting through red tape and problem solving on issues. I thought to get to know my approach as a legislator better, I would read directly from a letter written by my Democratic State Senate colleague from Milwaukee. It is with great respect that I nominate my colleague, Wisconsin State Senator Andrea Gage, for the CSG 20 Under 40 Award. I am Wisconsin State Senator Lena Taylor. I have served in the Wisconsin State Legislature for 16 years. In that time, I have seen it all: hyperpartisanship, respectful disdain, necessary bipartisanship, rural versus urban, and more. During it all, I have certainly questioned whether it was possible to get anything done on behalf of the people who elected us to office. Just when you get so frustrated that you throw your re-election paperwork in a drawer, along comes an Andrea Gage. I've had the opportunity to watch Senator Jacque in both his former role as a state representative and now as a freshman state senator. His name has always appeared on a diverse set of bills, proposals, and issues. He's never been boxed in by political affiliation, geographic location, or racial identification on the policies and causes that he champions. At first glance, he seems intentional in partnering across the aisle in legislation. However, when you get to know him and understand his interests, background, and family, it becomes clear that he believes in a seat at the table for everyone. Cooperation and inclusion is in his DNA, and working across the aisle comes natural to him. I have co-authored a number of bills with Senator Jacque, which he initiated. In terms of legislation, Senator Jacque has been a firestorm. The impressive number of his bills introduced, many with great bipartisan support, is only matched by the substantial number of his bills passed into law. He has an impressive record as a freshman legislator and has clearly established himself as a leader committed to getting the work done. On our policy issue areas where we don't agree, we have been able to have those differences in a manner that leaves the door open for future collaborations. Further, he has set an example for how we keep constituents at the forefront of our work. Thank you.
Ms. Gage-Michaels?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Andrea Gage-Michaels, and I'm an elder law attorney based in downtown Green Bay. I moved to this area in 2016 to work for the Elder Rights Project at Legal Action. As part of that effort, I helped hundreds of elder abuse victims with their legal problems, and I made house calls in Dorr, Brown, Calumet, Kewaunee, Manitowoc, and Outagamie counties, the same counties that make up Senate District 1. For every client we helped at Legal Action, we had to turn hundreds away. I went into private practice to help cover some of that gap. When I learned that my home in East Appear was redistricted, I immediately pledged to run for office because I'm so familiar with the successes and challenges facing these incredible communities. I felt morally obligated to help. People are still struggling. From rural Manitowoc to Dorr County and everywhere in between, I've represented hardworking men and women who are spending their golden years living in their cars or motels with the help of charitable organizations. If they have a doctor, they struggle to afford their medications. If they have a roof over their head, they aren't sure how long they'll have it or if the water will come out of their tap clear or brown. If they can work, they can try looking for a job, if they can manage to even get an internet signal. That's a hard thing to do when you live in a rural area not too far from here or my office in Green Bay, or when you have to pay for using a flip phone by the minute. In the wake of the pandemic, more and more people of all ages and backgrounds are finding themselves living the same way, even within blocks of this high school. As a former state Senate staffer, I know that there is more that we could do to be improving the lives for everyone in Northeast Wisconsin. I look forward to talking to all of you this evening about my initiatives and my background so that every voter in Senate District 1 can make a truly informed decision. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. Our first question goes to Ms. Gage-Michaels. If elected, what are your top 2 or 3 priorities for the next 2-year term? My
top priorities are increasing access to so many needed services and items in Northeast Wisconsin. I think people feel very cut off and isolated from other parts of the state, especially after the pandemic. We're struggling, as I mentioned during my opening comments, to access the internet. I've had clients that travel 2 to 3 hours south to my office in Green Bay to join a Zoom hearing in a courtroom that's 5 to 10 minutes from their home. There's something fundamentally wrong with the fact that in 2022, we're struggling to access what should be considered a basic utility at this point. I would also look to increase access to COVID testing and treatment, which is still a major concern in our area. This is something that hasn't gone away. We have people that are struggling to access vaccines and struggling to access aftercare. I've had clients that started their work with me with mild cognitive issues, and after a mere mild case of COVID, had really extreme side effects, including those that appeared to be Alzheimer's. I also want to make sure that we repeal the antiquated pre-Civil War abortion ban on our books. This is an assault on women's rights and access to health care generally. I also want to make sure that people of Northeast Wisconsin have a true say in what their laws are and in what their lawmakers are doing. I've heard time and again since I started this campaign, first gathering signatures and then going door to door throughout all of our lovely communities, that people are frustrated. They don't feel that they're being heard, regardless of their political affiliation. They're frustrated and they're tired of being divided.
Mr. Jacque?
Thank you. Well, recently I had the honor of being named the incoming chair for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Legislative Caucus, which is a 10 jurisdiction, 8 state, 2 Canadian province coalition of the Great Lakes states. We have quite a few different legislators contained within that caucus, but we focus primarily on water quality and toxic substances like PFAS, coastal resilience, and environmental resilience. So the environment is certainly an area that I've worked on quite a bit. I was actually pleased to have 3 different environmental bills signed into law by Governor Evers this session. One was the EnviroCheck, or environmental compliance audits for water and air quality. The Wisconsin Fund for groundwater quality protection, getting that renewed and expanded. And then, beach nourishment. That's something that is going to save quite a bit in cost for dredging projects as well as help our coastal communities. I also am working on, I have manure composting, the Freshwater Collaborative, and producer-led watershed management grants that I'll be working on there as well. Workforce is another top priority. I work quite a bit with academic and career planning within the K-12 system, youth apprenticeship, tech colleges, and apprenticeship, dual enrollment, trying to help the disabled, dealing with benefit cliffs. Certainly we have to even be concerned with immigration, the J-1 visas that certainly affect this area, the military. And finally, public safety is an area that I've worked on quite a bit in the legislature. Very proud of my work on domestic violence issues, human trafficking, drunk driving, among many others. And certainly will continue those efforts as well.
Thank you. The next question will go first to Mr. Jacque. Does the current polarization of the 2 major political parties pose a threat to democracy? And if so, how might it be fixed? Please explain.
Well, I think it has to start with conversations and opportunities like this to be able to have kind of polite interchange. Unfortunately, I will say that this session, more so than anyone prior, I've had death threats and death wishes, and yes, there's polarization. I've really tried my best not to contribute to that. I'm probably just about the only member of the legislature that doesn't swear, because I'm always looking around the corner for my mom to be washing my mouth out with soap. But it is unfortunate. I think this is the first campaign too where I actually had a fundraising solicitation targeting me, where it was saying that my mom should have aborted me. Just very disappointing when we have that level of discourse that really kind of puts up a barrier to having those kind of discussions that I think we can really work together on any number of issues, as certainly referenced by Senator Taylor. But I think, well, I have many friends across the aisle that I've worked with on many different bills. And I think my philosophy has been politics has to be the art of the possible. Now, if you look at my record, I had 24 bills signed into law just this last session, which was more than any other legislator by a pretty good amount. And the reason why is because I realize that for a bill to be signed into law, it has to be by its nature bipartisan. It has to have a signature from a governor of the opposing party. And most of those bills came through the process with very broad, if not unanimous, bipartisan support. And that's certainly something that I hope to continue.
Okay, Ms. Gage-Michaels, would you like me to reread the question, or?
Yes, if you could.
Does the current polarization of the two major political parties pose a threat to democracy, and if so, how might it be fixed? Please explain.
I do believe that political polarization is taking a major toll on our community. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone in this room or in our community that hasn't been told that the two things that you're not supposed to discuss at the dinner table are religion and politics. It's always verboten at Thanksgiving or holiday meals. In my home, it was the opposite. I had a Republican father, a Democratic mother, and we were taught from a very young age that talking about ideas that matter is important, that conversations that make your voices shake are the kind of conversations that are worth having. I'm deeply saddened to hear that members of our legislature are getting death threats. I was a legislative staffer and had a wonderful experience from 2008 to 2010. The state senator that I worked for from the Milwaukee area passed 19 legislative initiatives in 2 years. I was a key part of that and helped pass 4 of those legislative initiatives, including 2 major initiatives on public safety, including drunk driving reform, as you may recall from the headlines back in the day, and payday lending reform. I also, after serving as a state legislative staffer, was a alder on the Sun Prairie City Council, where I was one of 8 members, and 7 were members of the, well, it was a nonpartisan body, but they were of a Tea Party persuasion. And within less than a few months, I was named chair of the Personnel Committee by the most conservative mayor that Sun Prairie had seen in some time, because they knew that they could count on me to see, on a municipal level, there's no such thing as a Democrat intersection or a Republican intersection. There's just an intersection and building what you need to build for the community.
Thank you. The next question will go first to Ms. Gage-Michaels. There are many young families who would like to come to or return to this area. The lack of affordable childcare makes it difficult for families who need to work and earn a living wage to support their family. What will you do to address the growing need for childcare opportunities that are needed?
I have addressed this issue with a number of people, especially in Door County. I've heard from younger families and grandparents who are clamoring for their kids to move back home that it's really tough. The cost of childcare is very high. A lot of people are relying on family members or private providers in their home. And employers also want to see affordable childcare, because when our community is more inviting and more affordable, more people can afford to move home, to live here, and to work here. I think that we need to support these employers and make sure that we're offering tax credits to families that are looking for child care, offer incentives to employers for subsidizing said child care, looking at creative programming through our schools. I know a number of working mothers who rely on after-school programming to cover that gap between when the babysitter or themselves can pick up the children and get them home from school. I also think it's critically important to look at what we've been calling the brain drain from Wisconsin. So many young people have to look to another state in order to earn a living wage. And it's not just something that affects younger people. The cost of living is growing every day, and we're losing older people. I know that we're, talking about once they graduate from college, we need to keep them here. But in my years working in Northeast Wisconsin with older people, I can tell you that the real brains in the operation are people who are 60 and over. We have so much to learn from baby boomers, and I think anything that we can do to help bridge the divides between these generations, make sure that we're working together, that's when we're going to truly succeed and move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Jacque, would you like me to reread it?
Sure, go ahead. Thank you.
There are many young families who would like to come to or return to this area. The lack of affordable childcare makes it difficult for families who need to work and earn a living wage to support their family. What will you do to address the growing need for childcare opportunities that are needed?
Yeah, childcare is certainly a very pressing need. In fact, I'm very pleased to be the vice president of the board for Family and Child Care Resources of Northeast Wisconsin, a nonprofit, as well as on the board of the Paul Van Handel Foundation for families of children with special needs, where we actually subsidize child care for people to be able to re-enter the workforce. Door County United Way actually had a few initiatives in regards to child care, and certainly it's a particular need, just as housing is for up here on the peninsula. But I think a few things in particular, we really need to take a look at the actions that the state has taken most recently in taking the contract away from the child care resource and referral nonprofits around the state, and instead sending them to a politically connected out-of-state for-profit company based in New York that does not have the same capacity to be able to help our child care centers and entrepreneurs. That's one of the things that the Child Care Resource and Referral organizations had requested ARPA funding from the governor to be able to do recruitment, as well as assistance in regards to being able to get through the red tape and mentorship. But outside of that, one thing that we really need to address in regards to child care is benefit cliffs. Within our state aid, our federal programs in particular, where we're not given the flexibility that we administer at the state level, we have to find some way to allow for temporary income disregards, to allow for that step up for individuals to take on additional hours or responsibilities. It's something I was able to do successfully within the medical assistance purchase program. I've introduced legislation as well at the state level, but we are going to need some federal help on it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question we will begin with Mr. Jacque. How should the legislature address mental health needs in terms of both the community and the schools?
Sure. Mental health is a significant issue in our state. It's actually something that this last session I was successful in advocating for additional funding for autism treatment, but actually one of my bills that was signed into law dealt with entering Wisconsin into SIPACT, which is the Psychiatry Interjurisdictional Compact. Wisconsin has now joined 27 other states in being able to basically practice across borders if you have that accreditation within your state. It's something that I know certainly we have a number of individuals now who are part-time residents of Door County that will much more easily be able to utilize their practice, as well as the benefit that it has for patients. And certainly telehealth is another thing that we need to look at in particular, and also within the correction system and our schools. When you look at the co-occurring disorders with substance abuse and mental health, but when you had the inability for individuals who say were being treated through high school and then wanted to go to a college out of state, or were part of a military family and were deployed in another state, or simply people that lived on right on the state borders, it was a barrier to people being able to receive care. And it's something that I've worked quite a bit with Representative Paul Tittle on, and certainly something that this coming session we need to work on how we can improve reimbursement in mental health care as well. Thank you.
Ms. Gage-Michaels?
The Yes, thank you. This is a topic that is very important to me. My middle sister is a teacher in Central City, Milwaukee, and she works with children who have emotional and behavioral difficulties. My youngest sister, one that we lost to the brain drain to the Twin Cities, although she still comes across the border quite frequently, as we constantly request. She is a family and child therapist and works with children who have mental difficulties. And something that's very alarming to me is the lack of care that we are able to get into the schools for our children when they first start to develop mental health challenges. What I've learned is truly shocking to me. It's suggested that we should have a mental health professional or guidance counselor. We should have one for every 500 students. In Wisconsin, on average, we have one for every 901 students. Students are clamoring for the attention they need, and we have organizations that are dedicated to try to help address that gap by getting private practitioners into schools so that those children can have some exposure. Then we have parents that are working around the clock and having difficulty getting their children mental health care if they have the coverage to provide it. If that lack of treatment goes on, you can see a host of problems and see what may start out as a mild behavioral issue blossom into a full-blown mental health disorder by the time a person reaches adulthood. And we have people who are in their adulthoods who are struggling to pay for mental health care and access mental health care. If you're an older person looking for a neuropsych exam, it can take you 6 months to a year in Green Bay, let alone the rest of Senate District 1, to access that care. So we need to make sure it's affordable, accessible, and that we have enough practitioners in this part of the state.
Thank you. Ms. Gage-Michaels, you are first for this next question. How would you approach access to women's reproductive health care, specifically access to abortion and birth control?
As your state senator, I would do everything in my power to remove the 1849 criminal abortion ban from our books. It has been outdated and remained there, even though healthcare advocates have been cautioning us for decades that this is something that would be a very real threat upon the reversal of Roe. This statute would criminalize doctors providing abortions to people in need. When I first decided to launch my campaign, the niece that I spoke of, she's 7. At the time, she was 6. And I needed to explain to her why I was going to a rally to talk about abortion and what abortion was. My sister, a mental health care professional, was sitting nearby, so I felt very comfortable in discussing this with her under her supervision. I explained to my 6-year-old niece that there are some mothers who become pregnant, and it's a true blessing, as when her mother became pregnant with her. But there are times, due to health concerns or other issues, that a woman cannot be pregnant, and she has to go to a doctor for care. She looked at me, she paused for a moment, and she said, "Well, doctors need to help women, right?" And her mother and I looked at her, and we nodded, and we said yes. Now, if this is something that a 6-year-old can understand, I'm hoping that our state legislature and our future governor and our U.S. Senate can understand that too. This is basic health care. And we know from years of experience and from looking at the different laws worldwide that when abortion is illegal, women die. When abortion is illegal, women who have had miscarriages struggle to find the aftercare they need. And this is something we must act upon immediately.
Thank you. Mr. Jacque?
Thank you. Well, I am strongly in opposition to the liberal agenda of unlimited abortion on demand, and I am proud to have worked successfully to remove state subsidization of elective abortion. Abortion is defined in state statute as basically the intent to kill a child with no other purpose, something where it is an unintentional consequence. I am also the author of the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights, which requires both oral as well as written information to women who have been assaulted of all of their rights, including the ability to access contraception. But in this past session, I actually was able to get Governor Evers to sign a licensing restriction with professional and criminal penalties for genetic counselors who coerce women to get an abortion. And I will be looking to reintroduce legislation similar to what I have in the past to stop the practice of UW doctors and residents using taxpayer dollars on state salary, time, and benefits to perform abortions for Planned Parenthood or other abortion providers. Thank you.
Okay, the next question will go first to Mr. Jacque. What is your position on the need for affordable housing in Door and Kewaunee counties?
Well, it's certainly exceptionally acute here in Door County, being on the peninsula. One of the bills that I was able to get through with Representative Kitchens, actually it was the only TIF bill to get done in the last part of session, even though there were several, and it was because of the way that we approached it, was for Gibraltar, for workforce housing and their planned project there. But I've also been, as a member of the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, or WHEDA, was able to make the motion for there to be funding for pilots around the state. Luckily, Door County, as I expected, was prepared and able to jump in right away with a very good collaboration, which now has been funded through WHEDA to be able to help with that gap financing to make affordable housing and workforce housing projects happen here in the Door Peninsula. So that has been my involvement, and I've been very pleased to be part of that local coalition that we have for dealing with the issue.
Okay, Ms. Gage-Michaels?
Affordable housing is one of the most pressing issues for members of every generation, especially in Door County. I have a lot of experience working with folks who were struggling to find affordable housing or maintain affordable housing. And as part of my work with legal action and later in private practice, I am deeply disappointed with the lack of resources that we're providing to our municipalities and our counties. When I worked with folks who were struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay the rent, struggling to even make that reduced rent, I found that there were only 1.5 full-time employees or staffers for the Door County Housing Authority. For a very large geographical region, that is quite the challenge. The other challenge was the low inventory of housing. There were a number of potential solutions discussed, and one would include increasing the development here so that there are older units that become more available to older people, and make sure that there are more incentives to landlords to accept vouchers. Vouchers are a key way for people to be able to access housing. We also need to make sure that we are looking for developments that aren't just for people who are looking to make this their next vacation home, which is a very, very important issue to make sure that we are increasing tourism in this area. But we also need to make sure that we have plenty of 3-bedroom to 4-bedroom units in apartments, townhomes, things that working families depend on. If you have a family of 3 or 4 children and you're looking to rent a home with only 1 or 2 bedrooms, if you can even find a home, it's critically important that a family just has enough space to mature and grow.
Thank you. Ms. Gage-Michaels, you are first for the next question. What is your stance on the sale of assault-style rifles, and if you approve of them, why do we need them?
Rather than get into a discussion of what kind of firearms we are looking to allow, I think we need to be looking at proceeding in a smart, ethical, and sound way to make sure that the people who possess firearms have the mental acuity and fitness to do so. I have a hard time imagining why someone would need an assault rifle. Most sportsmen and hunters that I've encountered aren't looking for AK-47s to indulge in their favorite pastime. But what I have encountered when working with domestic violence victims statewide, and especially in Northeast Wisconsin, is that we need stronger laws to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. It is quite challenging to obtain a restraining order against, more often than not, a male spouse who's making deadly threats against his family. You have to reach a very high threshold and be able to recount exact dates, times, be able to quote specific threats, and then and only then can you even imagine getting those firearms relinquished to law enforcement. We need to do more to make sure that families have the tools they need to request that domestic abusers hand over their firearms. We also need to make sure that we have red flag laws where when an individual who is not fit to have firearms, their family or law enforcement is able to report that and make sure that those firearms are secure before they make deadly threats in the cases where someone has a mental illness that would cause them to pose a threat to themselves or others.
Okay, Mr. Jacque?
Well, I'm very pleased of my work in the legislature dealing with truth in sentencing for violent crimes, something that also was signed into law this session. There is legislation, very bipartisan, to take the domestic violence definition at the state level and have it match the federal level. That is something important that I have co-authored. But I think overall, increased accountability within the justice system is key. And there was an investigation in Milwaukee County that found that 3/4 of felons arrested for unlawful possession of a gun in that county saw no prison time as a consequence of that arrest, and that 37% of the time the prosecutors didn't even file charges. So I have authored legislation to require court approval before dismissing felon in possession charges for suspects with prior convictions for violent felonies, and have worked directly with the Wisconsin District Attorneys, police chiefs, and professional police on additional legislation that is necessary for public safety in this area.
Okay, Mr. Jacque, you are first for our next question. In 2020, Wisconsin public school spending was 6% below the national average and ranks 25th in the nation versus 2002 when it was 11th. Since 2013, voucher schools have been state-funded, increasing from $3 million to $76 million in 2020. If elected, how will you equitably fund public schools?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is that we need to overhaul the state funding formula. It certainly is broken over the years and has disproportionately been skewed towards Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin. But I am also the lead author of bipartisan legislation that actually is supported, I know, by the Wisconsin League of Women Voters and numerous stakeholders to expedite the distribution of school aid payments to districts. Right now, it is extremely backloaded within the course of the academic year, as opposed to something that is spread evenly. And so it creates additional stress on our local school districts in terms of short-term borrowing that many have to go towards. I have co-authored various recommendations of the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission on school funding, particularly related to early learning. And I am proud of my work on improved reading assessment, dual enrollment, youth apprenticeship, academic and career planning, teacher workforce issues, and to assist the retention of substitute teachers. Other thing, I took coursework at the Fall School of Public Affairs that, really adequacy is what is key. And spending above the adequacy level, it's not how much you spend, it's how you spend it. Certainly we have some great school districts in this area that have outperformed some of their peers. But I also have authored both statutory legislation as well as a proposed state constitutional amendment to require the state legislature to appropriate funding for the full cost of complying with any and all mandates imposed on local governments, including existing mandates. That includes for schools, and I believe that students with disabilities would be among the greatest beneficiaries of those proposals. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Gage-Michaels, do you want to hear it again? It was quite a lengthy beginning or not?
If you would.
Okay. In 2020, Wisconsin's public school spending was 6% below the national average, and it ranks 25th in the nation versus 2002 when it was 11th. Since 2013, voucher schools have been state-funded, increasing from $3 million to $76 million in 2020. If elected, how will you equitably fund public schools?
We have a constitutional obligation and duty to fully fund our public schools and support our educators. Students benefit when their educators have a strong voice in how their schools and classrooms are run, but we're not giving educators and our schools the resources they need to do their jobs. Right now, a public school receives under 30% reimbursement for services provided to a student with special needs, while private schools receive nearly 90%. And that is at the core of that disparate number that you're hearing in this question. Fundamentally, we need to meet the needs of a growing and diverse community to be a safe, engaging, and informative environment in which all children can learn and education professionals can thrive. We must fully fund public education. And the first and most important step that we need to take to improve our schools is to adequately fund them in a dependable manner. The way that we are funding schools is not keeping up with the cost of operations. It's not keeping up with the cost of living. A teacher shouldn't decide between continuing in their career and being able to pay their own rent. We shouldn't have teachers who are looking to apply for food share and vouchers of their own just to simply make ends meet. You should be able to finish your career as a teacher and have a thriving retirement because you've given your entire adulthood to making sure that our children are smart and that they're going to carry our state forward. We also need to be mindful that the COVID relief money is going to run out in 2024, and as of right now, our public schools, a record number of them, are forced to go to referendums. We're basically forcing our teachers to have the equivalent of mass bake sales and pleading with the community for funding. It's wrong.
The next question will go first to you, Ms. Gage-Michaels. As a candidate and as a current state senator, you are and would be entitled to state government health insurance paid for by taxpayers. Do you think the same should be provided to citizens here under the expansion of Medicaid in Wisconsin as they may be eligible?
Well, I can tell you, as a former state Senate staffer, one of the most crushing aspects of my boss being unelected was losing that incredible health insurance. It was truly outstanding. And it goes to show what we can do as a state for our employees, along with having a very handsome retirement system. I believe that more people should have access to that kind of health care. And healthcare costs as a small business owner, as I mentioned, I own my own law firm, they're quite high, and it's very attractive to be a part-time legislator and have those kind of benefits. I think that we should have those kind of benefits statewide. I think we should expand Badger Care and Medicaid to as many people as can qualify for it. When we invest in healthcare as a large group, more people can benefit. And when more people can benefit from excellent healthcare, we see improved outcomes at work, we see improved outcomes for our schools, and we see improved outcomes for our community. We've also learned the devastating impact that healthcare disparities have had on our community as a result of COVID. An underlying health condition should never be a death sentence. People should not be living with undiagnosed health conditions. The more that we expand access to healthcare, the more that people thrive, the more that they can survive the next pandemic that's on the way, the next healthcare crisis that their family faces. When we all do better, we all do better.
Mr. Jacque?
Sure. Could you repeat that question?
Sure. As a candidate and as a current state senator, you are and would be entitled to state government health insurance paid for by taxpayers. Do you think the same should be provided to citizens here under the expansion of Medicaid in Wisconsin as they may be eligible?
Sure. So the first thing that I would say is I think I want better for our residents than what Medicaid can provide. Because if you look at Medicaid as a program, it's only reimbursing providers pennies on the dollar. And in some cases that leads to horrific reductions in access. Certainly we saw that before we made the recent investments that I actually led the authored for oral health for children, as well as autism treatment, and really across the board for hospitals and all of our healthcare providers, because otherwise they're basically operating at a loss when they're accepting Medicaid patients. So I think we really need to fix that issue, and that's kind of at the core of the Medicaid expansion issue, is that for us to sign on the dotted line, we then lose any ability as a state, just like with these benefit cliffs that we're seeing with other federal programs. We lose the ability to make changes and adjustments to those programs. We certainly aren't going to receive the funding that's necessary. And when you look at, again, the Medicaid reimbursement rates, now, I'm proud to be the author of the pre-existing conditions legislation without exclusions or lifetime limits. That was something that we were able to pass unanimously out of one chamber of the legislature. I was named the Relentless Badger for the Disabled by the Wisconsin Independent Living Network because I was successful in basically eliminating the benefit cliffs within the medical assistance purchase program, because that is something that was keeping people from being able to stay in the jobs that meant so much to them and their families. Been able to do additional things in regards to step therapy, prescription drug costs, but let's see, I guess I still got a few seconds. Especially expanding access to clinical trials and off-label therapies for FDA-approved drugs, and that's really one of the things that we need to work on.
Okay, our next question will go to Mr. Jacque first. And this is a two-part question. Do you support full and equal rights, including civil rights, for persons who identify as LGBTQ? Please be specific. And would you oppose or support legislation to prohibit biological males from competing in women's and girls' sports?
Okay. Civil rights, I believe people are people. I certainly believe in supporting individual rights. So I'm not quite sure what that question was asking, but I mean, I don't believe in discrimination, period. So as far as prohibiting men from competing in women's sports, yes, that is something that that I am supportive of that legislation.
Okay, Ms. Gage-Michaels, do you want to hear them again, or you?
Yes, if you could repeat the question.
Do you support full and equal rights, including civil rights, for persons who identify as LGBTQ? Please be specific. And would you oppose or support legislation to prohibit biological males from competing in women's and girls' sports?
I wholeheartedly support the full panoply of civil rights for people who are lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. There is a movement afoot that we have seen, along with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, to reverse a number of what has historically been considered fundamental rights, rights that are so fundamental that they could not even be questioned by our Supreme Court. We had a ruling that ensured that gay, transgender, and queer people could enjoy the right to marry. It is a crucial right, and it would be a true travesty if anything were to happen to those rights. I have people coming to my elder law office, people of all ages, saying, do I need to do something with my estate plan? Because my wife or my husband may not be my wife or my husband if the country continues to go in this direction and the state follows suit. They have no faith that our state, which by and large, the people of Wisconsin value fairness and equity and kindness, they have no faith that our governments are going to protect their marriages, that they're going to protect their ability to be parents to their own children. I staunchly defend the rights of LGBTQ people. I have a long record of doing so. I was on the steering committee for the parents of friends of lesbians and gays in Sun Prairie and have continued to support my LGBTQ friends in Northeast Wisconsin. I am also opposed to schools deciding what gender a child should be and what sports that they should be able to participate in. If you identify as a woman, you participate as a woman. The end.
All right, this next question goes first to Ms. Gage-Michaels. Given that the power to protect Wisconsin waters against pollution from concentrated animal feeding operations, or Cafos, continues to be challenged in the courts, what legislation will you support to clarify and strengthen the power on this agency?
I think we need to be doing everything we can to protect our waters, both our shorelines as they rise on Lake Michigan, our municipal water, and our well water, which is continuing to be contaminated by livestock contamination and PFAS, as we've discussed throughout the evening. PFAS has been, these forever chemicals are associated with a host of problems, including thyroid cancers, reproductive cancers, and I think like COVID, we're going to find out that there are side effects that we're not even fully aware of. We need to be encouraging our agricultural community with tax incentives and other incentives to make sure that they have the right approach and that they have the variability to do what it takes to make sure that our waters stay clear. I've become very fortunate to know a number of advocates as I've run for office and folks who are working diligently to get farmers and industries the tools that they need to keep our grounds clear and our groundwater clear. I'm very faithful that in one of the most intuitive and ingenious states where we have come up with so many advances, both in industry and in government, that we can come up with some sound policies that make sure that we're doing what we can to preserve our natural resources.
All right, Mr. Jacque?
You could repeat the question, please?
Sure. Given that the power to protect Wisconsin waters against pollution from concentrated animal feeding operations, or Cafos, continue to be challenged in the courts, what legislation will you support to clarify and strengthen the power on this agency?
Sure. Well, I think certainly we have seen tremendous movement forward in terms of nutrient management plans, or really the, expansion of best practices. Things like rotational grazing, cover crops, low-till, no-till, and manure composting, which is one of the things that I've seen certainly in the conservation partnership locally, Clean Bay backers, groups of that nature, Save the Bay initiative. And so that is one of the barriers that we have in Wisconsin. It's not present in other states. It has been unanimous through each chamber of the legislature, unfortunately, never in the exact same legislative session. So that is something that I'll continue to move forward. We do need to provide additional funding for county conservation departments, producer-led watershed management grants, certainly like Peninsula Pride Farms, green infrastructure. One of the bills that, again, I had signed this session dealt with it was called the EnviroCheck program. It was the DNR rebranding the Environmental Compliance Audit Program to really change what had otherwise extremely low utilization to something that now can be marketed as in compliance with the federal program, to allow for small business owners, including farmers, to be able to proactively do an assessment of what it is that that they're doing, and work with the DNR on compliance there. But certainly, the Freshwater Collaborative is another resource that we need to look at, but we need to install some of the benchmarks that originally were talked about and actually interface with what's called blue accounting through the Great Lakes Commission. And that's another one of the initiatives that we have through the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. Thank you.
All right, the next question will go to Mr. Jacque first. What do you see the role of religion is in politics?
Well, I don't know what role religion directly plays in politics, other than obviously we have the constitutional right that the government shall make no law respecting religion, nor the free establishment thereof. Now, certainly all laws are moral judgments, so somebody's faith can certainly impact their worldview, and whether that's within the criminal justice code or the tax system, we do make those moral judgments. But I mean, I don't know that religion itself, I mean, we're not a theocracy.
All right, Ms. Gage-Michaels?
It's really an excellent question, and I'm thankful that someone was so thoughtful to pose that, because it's the elephant in the room when we're discussing some of these issues. You may have noticed there's a framed sign over there that says people, it's the first one on the top of that bookcase, and it says, "People with good intentions make promises, but people with good character keep them." I think for so many of us, we've started building our character as young people by being introduced to religion. And religion has also shaped our laws. The Judeo-Christian ethic is at the foundation of our Constitution and of most of our statutes. At the same time, we have been taught that, and we've seen in our community and from some of our legislators, that religion isn't fueling good and positive works. It's fueling hatred. It's fueling antagonism of members of our LGBTQ community. It's fueling activities that would limit women's access to birth control, not just abortion. There are religious activists who have sought to prevent women from picking up their birth control prescriptions, going so far as to fall to their knees and having to be dragged out by police before handing a woman her legal birth control prescription. And we see legislators who are accepting endorsements from groups such as Pro-Life Wisconsin and Wisconsin Right to Life that are shaping their legislative initiatives based on what their idea of a Christian-based birth control policy should look like. So those are the kinds of things that we need to look out for, both as good Christians, as good people of faith, and as legislators.
All right, the next question goes first to Ms. Gage-Michaels. If you could change or propose one law at the state level, what would that be?
That's a really hard question to ask a lawyer and then give me only 2 minutes to respond. I started my career as a TV reporter and then transitioned into media relations, where I helped lawyers and public policy leaders learn how to condense their statements. And I can now feel a higher level of empathy with watching the timekeepers in the front row. But I'd have to say that my number one priority upon entering office would be to make sure that we remove the criminal abortion ban from our Wisconsin books. There is no need for a bill that affects our gynecologists and our women and anyone who is of reproductive age with a uterus, with a bill that was devised before, women were thought to be full and equal participants in our society. It's absolutely wrong. I would also make sure that we create even more protections for victims of domestic violence and elder abuse victims. And I think I'm on time.
Mr. Jacque?
Well, you can ask me to only name one. I probably can name a few more in the time that I have here. But, one that certainly I think back to some of the bills that have had a lot of legislative support, but either because of personalities or any number of issues, chairman, people in the process, don't get through. One in particular would be Wisconsin's adoption laws with an out-of-court consent process that brings us outside of the mainstream. We are actually one of the very small handful of states that does not have an out-of-court consent process for birth mothers, and it does lead to a lot of adoptions being finalized in other states and issues within the foster care system here in Wisconsin. But human trafficking would probably be the other legislation that I would, that first pops to mind. I have something that kind of addresses the demand side of human trafficking that I've worked on with a number of human trafficking groups to both increase penalties to attack some of that disposable income that's used, but also use those funds then to split between internet crimes against children and the law enforcement investigations, as well as the victim services and building capacity there, which I think is really critical when we're trying to get people out of the life, as it's called. So, thank you.
All right, Mr. Jacque, you are first for what will be the last question before closing statements. And this is a two-parter. What should be the state's priorities in addressing the distribution of our federal infrastructure dollars and the lack of consistent, high-quality, and accessible broadband is a challenge for families and businesses. What will you do to support the ability for this challenge to be addressed?
Boy, there's a lot to pack in there. Certainly when you look at road funding, which is something that I've advocated for successfully in terms of the Southern Bridge Connector in Brown County, as well as the 41 expansion, but also a number of other projects here throughout the district. And I also am on the State Building Commission, which is something that, none of the questions that we had tonight dealt directly with inflation. But that certainly is an issue that we're going to, because we haven't seen the federal ARPA dollars largely used towards projects that actually would have qualified for them, we are now going to have to figure out for those projects already enumerated how we're going to be able to make up that funding and keep those projects on schedule, because we're talking some pretty significant issues with our veterans' homes, our university system, and certainly we'd like to see projects like the Potawatomi Tower restoration go forward here locally as well. That's one of the things that we didn't really have a question regarding state budgeting, but I do believe that our vehicle-related sales tax should be segregated and put into the transportation fund to allow for the state to sustainably continue to make those investments going into the future. In regards to broadband, that's something that I've been very supportive of. We have had a number of rounds of funding recently, and those have gone disproportionately, luckily, in our favor here in the 1st State Senate District, all of the 1st State Senate District. But at a certain point, you don't want to just be competing for projects and the dollar amount of those projects goes up because there's only so many folks to do the work. I think in regards to broadband, you've had a number of counties that have basically put in the time to do the speed tests or to figure out what it would take to ensure for a reliable connection for the entire county, as opposed to, all right, time's up.
Ms. Gage,
just digging over and over. We need a dig once law. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Ms. Gage-Michaels?
Would you repeat the question?
Sure. What should be the state's priorities in addressing the distribution of our federal infrastructure dollars and the lack of consistent, high-quality, and accessible broadband is a challenge for families and businesses? What will you do to support the ability for this challenge to be addressed?
We need elected officials to push as hard as they can for every dollar that they can from every source that's available, including monies from the Biden administration, from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and that's a once in a lifetime opportunity that we can't afford to pass us by. I think probably most people in this audience remember that we turned down needed dollars for high-speed rail the last time that we had the opportunity to accept stimulus dollars. And now we find ourselves at a critical juncture where our communities are in very great need, and we need to be as aggressive as possible to make sure that Wisconsin is applying and getting as many grants as possible. We also need to be mindful of the fact that our state has a budget surplus. We have millions and billions of dollars that are sitting in state coffers, while our state legislators, including state legislators in this area, are not doing anything to get those dollars released to this part of the state. We need to be, as I said, as aggressive as possible in seeking those dollars, particularly for broadband. We may have a few successes here and there. We may see that there are companies laying broadband lines, but we have to do everything that we can for our entire state. I know I've mentioned Northeast Wisconsin and the fact that I have clients that are driving 2 hours south, 3 hours south to come to my office for consistent internet signals. But we don't exist in a vacuum. We'll only do as well as the entire state does. We all have to be interconnected. When our economy, when our ability to seek employment, when our children's ability to access educational lessons in case we end up with another shutdown, and that's it's a possibility, we have to have broadband accessible, affordable, statewide.
All right. Candidates, you will now have 3 minutes each to make closing remarks, and we will begin with Ms. Gage-Michaels.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's an incredible honor to speak to any members of the electorate, but especially as informed as ones as yourselves. These were challenging questions, important questions, and I hope that people come away from this better understanding myself and my opponent and get to make that informed choice that the League of Women Voters has steadfastly promoted as long as I've been alive and as long as my parents have been alive, actually. Here's the bottom line. Regardless of where you fall on the issues, we are at a critical juncture, and people are paying attention like never before. You may feel divided from your neighbors, especially after what we weathered as a community during COVID. I know that it deeply affected my family as well. We lost my mom after a bout of long-haul COVID just 2 days before Christmas in 2020. She was as conscientious and careful as you could be. She took every precaution. She would have been one of the first people in line for the vaccine. But she never had the opportunity to get one. I want to make sure that we do everything we can for people who are suffering. Just 2 weeks before we lost my mom, we were on a family vacation, and she told me that she just hadn't felt the same since she had had one of the first cases of COVID. When she did have her case of COVID early on during the pandemic, when she called the emergency room, she was told, "Don't come in unless your lips turn blue." And there are people who are desperately afraid of getting the care that they need if they have an emergency room that's close enough to attend. We have to do everything in our power to make this better. And we also need to heal from some of the divides that has caused. I've had the good fortune to speak to people throughout this district on their doorsteps, in community gatherings, and they're telling me that regardless of where they were in the beginning, whether they wanted to wear a mask or they thought that vaccines were safe or not, that they're tired of feeling divided from their neighbors. They're tired of seeing the toll that this is taking on our community. They know that we can unite, they know that we can do better, and they're right. I've also heard loud and clear from many of you and your neighbors throughout this district that you're tired of reckless rhetoric. You want elected officials to stop, to listen, to learn, and work hard, and that's exactly what I'm prepared to do. Thank you.
Mr. Jacque?
Thank you. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for actually coming out here tonight, as well as those that are taking the time to view this on the internet. And I really appreciate just the opportunity to have this forum. You know, I should say one of the bills that I introduced this session was to actually access funding from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. I wish that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have joined me for coastal resiliency revolving loan funds that would have benefited this area. But hopefully we'll give them another chance in the next next session. And also was looking to talk a little bit more about mental health treatment courts that I've been trying to get funding for, and generally accepted accounting principles within our state budgeting process. But I really enjoy the opportunity to help individuals, some of them coming to me on their worst day, dealing with red tape with state agencies. I like getting them results. I like taking bills all the way through the legislative process. And, you know, it's just, it's an honor, especially to be recognized by veterans groups like the American Legion or VFW, by groups like the Professional Firefighters, Professional Police, Wisconsin Counties Association as Legislator of the Year, to be able to protect the environment, to expand economic development and redevelopment, to help with vocational opportunities for students, veterans, and the disabled in ways that have paid dividends for all of Northeast Wisconsin. I think that we need to look at ways to help with the cost of living that is going up. That includes allowing people to keep more of their paycheck, adopting broad-based tax cuts. There's certainly more that we can do with health care reform and access, certainly addressing benefit cliffs, as I talked about earlier. And you know, again, I just appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations tonight. And please feel free to reach out anytime. For those of you at home, cell phone is 920-819-8066. Email is andre.jacque@gmail.com. But give me a call anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates, for participating in tonight's forum and for serving if elected. You are invited to remain after the forum to give the public an opportunity to meet and visit with you personally. We hope this forum has been helpful to you as a voter. Remember, the general election is Tuesday, November 8th. Considering TV, it's kind of hard to forget. Current voter and election information can be found at myvote.wi.gov. There you can access information about voter registration, updating your name or address, absentee voting, polling locations, and what's on your ballot. Thank you all for attending and participating. Please let others know that they can view this forum at lwvdoorcounty.org. Thank you, candidates. Please join me in a round of applause for our candidates. You're welcome. Thank you for coming.